Thank you for your time. My name is Beitula, and this is Shooting from the Hip. Slim, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks, brother. Today's episode of Shooting from the Hip, we're gonna talk about a study that was run in the late 50s and early 60s, and it's called Universe 25. So you're gonna please bear with us. I'm actually gonna read a compressed statement about the study itself, and then we'll start talking about it as soon as I've done that. Okay, you ready, Slim?
I'm excited.
Okay, right on. Okay, the idea of Universe 25 came from an American scientist named John Calhoun, and he's an ethnologist. So ethnology is a scientific study of non-human animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions and viewing behavior as an evolutionary adaptive trait, right? So Universe 25, the experiment, is one of the most terrifying experiments in the history of science, which, through the behavior of a colony of mice, is an attempt by scientists to explain human societies who created an ideal world in which hundreds of mice would live and reproduce. So specifically, Calhoun built a paradise for mice, a design space where rodents had an abundance of food and water, as well as large living space. In the beginning, he started with 4 pairs of mice, and that in short time began to reproduce, resulting in their population growing rapidly. However, after 315 days, their reproduction began to decrease significantly. Okay, so I'll just keep reading it, and then we can then we start dissecting it. So, behavioral sink is a term invented by ethnologist John Calhoun to describe the collapse in behavior which can result from overcrowding. The term and concept derived from a series of overpopulation experiments Calhoun conducted on Norway rats between 1958 and 1962. When the number of rodents reached 600, a hierarchy was formed between them, and the then so-called wretches appeared. Right, so it becomes the organization of the large numbers, and the majority of them are the huddled masses, or the wretches, right? These larger rodents began to attack the group, with the result that many males began to collapse psychologically. As a result, the females did not protect themselves, and in turn became aggressive towards their young. So this is the outcome and the breakdown of the population, right? As time went on, the females showed more and more aggressive behavior, isolation elements, and lack of reproductive mood. There was a low birth rate, and at the same time an increase in mortality in younger rodents. Then a new class of male rodent appeared, the so-called beautiful mice. They refused to mate with the females or to fight for their space. All they cared about was food and sleep. At one point, beautiful males and isolated females made up the majority of the population. According to Calhoun, the death phase consisted of 2 stages, the first death and the second death. The first death characterized by the loss of purpose in life beyond mere existence. No desire to mate, raise young, or establish a role within society. As time went on, juvenile mortality reached 100% and reproduction reached 0. Among the endangered mice, homosexuality was observed, and at the same time, cannibalism increased despite there being plenty of food. 2 years after the start of the experiment, the last baby of the colony was born. By 1973, he had killed the last mouse in Universe 25. John Calhoun repeated the same experiment 25 more times, and each time the result was the same. Calhoun's scientific work has been used as a model for interpreting social collapse, and his research serves as a focal point for the study of urban sociology. So, in 1962, the study, Calhoun described the behaviors of the mice as follows. Many females were unable to carry pregnancy to full term or to survive delivery of their litters if they did. And even greater numbers are after successfully giving birth, fell short in their maternal functions. Among the males, the behavioral disturbances ranged from sexual deviation to cannibalism, cannibalism and to form frenetic overactivity and a pathological withdrawal from individuals would emerge to eat, drink, or move about only when other members of the community were asleep. So they'd become active when everybody else was inactive, right? The social organization of the animals showed equal disruption. A common source of these disturbances become most dramatically apparent in the populations of the first series of 3 experiments in which we observed the development of what we called a behavioral sink, right? So the animals would crowd together in the greatest number in one of the 4 interconnecting pens in which the colony was maintained. As many as 60 to 80 rats in each experimental population would assemble in one pen during periods of feeding. Individual rats would rarely eat except in the company of other rats. As a result, extreme population densities developed in the pen adopted for eating and leaving the others with sparse populations. In the experiments to which behavioral sink developed, infant mortality ran as high as 96% among the most disoriented groups in the population. Are we currently witnessing direct parallels in today's society? Weak men with little to no skills, no protection instincts, and overly agitated and aggressive females with no maternal instincts. So the applicability to humans. Calhoun himself saw the fate of the population of mice as a metaphor for the potential fate of humankind. He characterized the social breakdown as the spiritual death, with reference to the bodily death as the second death, right? So, is there now, to say that this study is not free of controversy would be unfair, right? So not, there are detractors from it, but largely they see it. And here's a fair question: like, after everything I just read, do you see parallels in the world that you're living in today?
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah, it really is a punch in the gut, eh?
Yeah, it's kind of scary. I like the idea that they're social animals, so they congregate when they eat. But once they all congregate in the same area and start eating together, and there's, overpopulation going on during this time, that's when I saw the significant change. Like online, I saw a graph where all of a sudden, like, behavioral changes, like you say, a mental breakdown of the men and women, where they sort of lose their roles. Like, they're not paternal, they're not maternal.
Yeah. Okay, so I think part of it too is, I think you're right on the money, like, so that suddenly, like, so them willfully concentrating themselves in a certain pen when they had all this available space, it's that socialization and the need to congregate that initiates the breakdown, right? Because initially they do it based on servicing their basic needs, which is to eat, and then it becomes a social setting where now they're eating the moment, and they congregate when they eat, and then eating becomes secondary reason why they do it. Now congregating becomes the primary reason. And in the congregation, I think it might be fair to interpret it is that the loss of roles or meaning and purpose in their existence. Because remember, in the natural world, mice colony for them to grow to that size is probably unheard of. 1, and 2, in the natural environment, they're constantly foraging and constantly in a state of struggle, right? And that state of struggle is to make sure that they meet all their basic requirements. And so that makes them, so then those the roles that they fall into, like the nurturing capacity to create offspring, and then to nurture that offspring, it's all part of the meaning and purpose to their existence. But when they're always concentrated together in high numbers and they're not doing anything except socializing, it tends to then draw out, because it becomes kind of like a meaningless existence. So you can see then where the interpretation is that what it does lead to is that there's a thrill in achieving success in the middle of a struggle. So when you overcome the struggle, you have a sense of satisfaction. So I'm sure even for such a simple organism that has a simple level of awareness, that it experiences some degree of satisfaction or sense of satisfaction over the success of the fact that they're able to continue living for another day, and they're raising their brood or their families, and they're maintaining their social interactions, but not as a primary focus to their existence. The interactions are after they've managed to meet the struggle for their basic needs.
Right. So if they have food available to them, did they just start congregating in the idea like, oh, I'm gonna mate? Or
No, I think so. Initially, what ended up happening is that it became a thing of convenience, because then they could congregate while they're meeting their basic needs, which is something probably they don't probably do in their natural environment. They're not all getting together to eat,
yeah.
right? But here in this ideal, in this mice paradise or this rat paradise, where suddenly there's abundance of food, so then socializing, like I said, became a secondary thing to meeting to getting food, and then eventually, after a number of generations are born, it becomes a primary reason, because they're getting together and they're not eating anymore. They're not driven by the socialization is what's driving them now. So it started out meeting the basic need of having food to be able to function and keep their bodies functioning and stuff, and then but because it was this idyllic environment where they didn't have to struggle for nourishment, for food, then socialization becomes the primary focus of their existence. And then in that socialization, now they don't experience any real satisfaction, because they're just purely socializing. So they used to derive some satisfaction from the struggle of trying to find a place to to create a place to live, or finding a place to live, and then foraging for food, which brought them a sense of reward when they were able to meet all their basic needs in doing that. So now that's gone, and then so what supplements that is all this excessive socialization. So in the excessive socialization, for them to feel something, they end up seeking out other behaviors that are not within their natural boundaries, right? That might occur, but in a probably a very rare and small percentage of them. So then things like cannibalism. Why would you turn to cannibalism
with the food?
So because they're not eating other mice for nourishment.
Was it just to have aggression and to have that outlet?
Perhaps a thrill.
Oh, that's sick.
Thank you.
Well, it's strange.
But it's not strange. It illustrates it. Now, having said all of this, it illustrates the point perfectly, that the only way for them now to have any sense of satisfaction is now they have to seek it in aberrant behavior, deviant behavior. They have to do extreme things now just to fucking feel normal.
Right, like you said, they had that death of,
the first death, which is the death of their purpose, the death of their spirit, and then the second death is them giving up their physical body, right? So
does that seem weird to us? That
no, not at all. Let me ask it. I'll ask the question again.
Yeah.
Do you see parallels in our world today?
Yes.
Right, and what is it? Spiritual death, right? The first death is the loss of purpose beyond mere existence.
And they have no means to create this purpose either.
Right, because they're simple organisms. Right, they're not higher order thinkers. They have basic levels of awareness. So that's a significant difference. So then when you hear when there are detractors to the study, or controversy around the study, it's because the mice and rats are trapped by their biology. So then the biology can become a biological dead end, because they're not able to change or to create meaning and purpose, right? That has nothing to do with their basic needs, right? So remember, this is all a result of suddenly having all their basic needs available or met for them. And so then it eliminates purpose. And then once purpose is gone, then they're just, you'll pardon the poor expression, but they're just chasing shits and giggles.
Is it too far to have the opinion that they're more subjective once they lost the meaning, because their meaning was like, hey, I need food, I need to reproduce?
Yeah, I would say that like a simple organism like that probably only can experience subjectivity, right? But having said that, that maybe again going back to the discussion we had about subjectivity and objectivity, that only through objectiveness would you start asking the question, what are we doing? Where you would look at your own behavior and then try to understand why you're behaving in the way that you do. So then if the conclusion becomes that it's a result of lack of meaning and purpose in one's existence, and I think this might be a good time to actually see what the dictionary says about meaning and purpose and how it's defined, right? So meaning is defined as, according to the dictionary, the thing one intends to convey, especially by language, to purport, right? Do not mistake my meaning. It can be interpreted as being the thing that is conveyed especially by language, right? Or it can be something meant or intended. So the aim might be like mischievous meaning was apparent, right? Like that you're able to discern what their intentions were. So meaning is intention, right? But it's a significant quality. Especially it's the implication of a hidden or a unique significance, that it's something that can be entirely subjective. So it doesn't matter then if meaning is there's an objective meaning or a subjective one. So long as you have meaning, then meaning provides purpose. What then is the real meaning of purpose? So then, well, once you create a meaning, it's what lends to the purpose to your existence. So something set up as an object or an end to be attained, right? So we understand that for purpose, but purpose, you can't have purpose without you having an intention or a meaning to do something. You intend to do something. So right, so they're interchangeable, and they're not exactly the same thing. Right, one facilitates the other, right, and it provides for all of us the reason to get out of bed in the morning. So now, having said that, do you have a meaning to your life? Do you have a purpose to your existence? You don't have to answer it. I'm just putting it out there. But again, you don't have to make it about you personally. But
well, I would say we find purpose, but it's hard to describe it.
So do you find it or you create it? Do we find it or do we create it?
It might be a little bit of both. I don't know.
I would agree too, in the sense that like I don't know that you necessarily like find meaning.
It's not given
but through the exploration, like learning.
Yeah.
Then that's where in the process of learning, which is a process of discovery, you formulate ideas that can become your meaning or contribute to your life in a meaningful way, and then that leads to purpose. So I'm gonna ask,
could meaning be like this exploratory thing?
Well, yeah, that's just as meaningful as it can be. Here's the thing,
and the purpose for actualization, it's like
is then to realize it. Then your purpose comes to realize it. That I think that meaning and purpose can be anything that you make it to be. So think about people who turn to religion. It provides for them meaning and purpose in their existence. Sports teams, politics, all of those things. So they have a political ideology. It lends to giving them purpose and meaning in their life.
could I suggest that without religion or sports or political views, you could have this whole lifetime of exploratory actualization, and it's in order to find a bigger and bigger question. Whereas if you're on a team,
Okay, so then
you want to support that team.
all right. So,
you have
okay,
an
so
end in
then
mind.
okay, so then so what you're talking about then is having a clear bias in your meaning and your purpose. So like the sport of the team, right, or the ideology, or the the religious, spiritual, metaphysical ideology. There, I understand where we're going. Those were reflective of personal biases, whereas you could, if your purpose is simply to understand, and you use the word exploratory, you make your life about the exploration of life. So you make your life about exploring life further, which to me makes the absolute most sense. So then now the meaning and purpose to life then becomes one thing: understanding, right? So understanding is the capacity then to be able to see the broadest picture and to appreciate things from the smallest scale to the broadest scale. And so I think it's kind of undervalued and understated, and when it could be something that might drive each and every one of us, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of this interesting way I've heard wisdom being described. It's like this idea of getting all the garbage out of the way. So it's not like you're more intelligent, you're just taking away the biases that you can notice.
Right. So then you brought up subjectivity. So subjectivity, which is another way of saying preference or bias, it illustrates how those things can, even though they'll fend off the spiritual death, they'll prevent from that occurring, they don't reflect a deeper, more profound understanding. It's an understanding that services the bias or the preference, right? And that's what subjectivity does. Where objectively, then, if you come at things objectively, you're just trying to understand, and you're trying to understand in terms of everything that you're surrounded by, not as it relates to you, just as it is. So you're not making it about you, right? Which is what subjectivity is all about. It's everything with regards to you, right? So self-interest and whatever your self-requirements are. Whereas now, if you're objective, all you're interested in is what there is to observe. What is. As confusing as that may sound.
It's not confusing me. I'm thinking about, well, it is confusing, but it's not confusing me. I'm thinking about, if you're on a team, it makes sense that the subjective experience you have, or the team gives you a subjective experience,
right? Because
that's why you went to it. It gave you this place of comfort.
Right.
Understanding, air quotations.
Well, or it would be maybe more accurate to say like a sense of security, belonging, right? Those are part of remember?
Comfort.
Right, but remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember when we talked about that, the sense of belonging, security, right? So it meets a lot of those needs. So
you say a lot, but not all.
Not all. No, not all. But it helps to then fortify you in terms of so that you don't suffer spiritual death, so that you have purpose, and this goes back to purpose and meaning to your existence. Remember, this is what Universe 25 demonstrated, that if you're operating entirely out of meeting your basic needs, and you're only interested in yourself, it leads to extremist behavior. It clearly demonstrates that, right? So then here comes a question. So then if self-interest or subjectivity can produce extremism, think about tribalism, which is, sports teams. I love sports, but I love to play them. I don't have a team. I don't sit there and cheer for like whomever is playing against whomever. I like them for the athleticism. I like them for the sense of camaraderie, for competition, but only for the moment. Like, to me, they're outside of that moment when you're actually playing the sport. It's fucking meaningless, right? It's just a sport. but see the level of importance that you can elevate that to.
Yeah, you can respect the art of it without picking the left side or the right
Right,
side of the field.
because winning to me ultimately is just as meaningless. Winning, losing. Guess what? The reality is there's always winners and losers, and no matter how great you think you are, there will always be somebody bigger, better, faster, stronger, smarter.
When you see somebody on the field and they do something amazing, it doesn't matter what team they're on. You're like, holy shit!
Yeah,
Look at that human go!
right, 100%. Right. So that I love the idea of that. Right. That where people, because now we're talking about, okay, we can dovetail this into meaning and purpose. So now pushing the limits of what they can do, physically, mentally, that you don't have to be restrained, that you can push boundaries, push beyond limits. But you have to do it thoughtfully too, because if you don't, if you're entirely in service of ego and self and stuff like that, it'll lead to extreme behavior, right?
I think a lot of that extreme behavior represents itself as like you trying to change the external instead of understanding the external and then changing yourself to adapt to it, which it's not like you should always have to adapt. Sometimes maybe there should be an external change.
In balance, you're gonna, if you're balanced, you're gonna move from just self-interest and to selflessness, and that it's fluid. You'll flow back and forth from those states, right? That like, you're not entirely one thing. There's no balance in being completely selfless, right? Because now you're basically giving. Now you're exploiting yourself for the benefit of others. You go like,
Yeah.
to what end? So that you don't benefit in any meaningful way other than to be of constant service to others. We should be in service to one another. But it starts with you having respect and taking full responsibility for your own existence first. And then once you're able to do that, then you're able to be able to offer it to others. Right? And then if we do that interchangeably, that we do that for each other, then guess what? Then you have a stronger sense of community, a sense of connection. And again, that staves off spiritual death.
If you have someone who's driven like ideologically by like this idea of being altruistic, they'll give of themselves, but the idea that that person's giving for other people, that's great. But they're going to do it until they're like just gone, and then they have no money,
Well, yeah,
and then the whole
waste,
community loses them.
right?
So you have to be a little selfish.
Right. Again, if you're balanced, you'll recognize when it's important to act in self-interest versus when it's not, and that's ultimately when you look at shooting from the hip, in the broadest sense. We're champions of balance. This idea that you can have a balanced existence and that life should be a struggle, but we can dictate this. We can dictate the shape of that struggle. So what do I mean by that? So education, I think most people recognize it for what it is. It's just pure memory work, and you're bombarded with as much information and then tested on your ability to memorize that information, and then you're pushed through the system in a short period of time, all for the purposes of getting a job, right? So in my opinion, my best estimate, a balanced education would be made up of 3 parts. So a third of the educational day would be devoted to pure academics, so mathematics, literature, science, biology, all that stuff, right? So it only represents a third of the school day. Then the other third of the school day would be the training of practical skills. So that would go from things like as simple as like doing laundry, preparing food, and you do that regularly, to learning to do taxes, to be able to file your own taxes. Sorry for all those institutions out there that depend on us not knowing how to do their taxes, but things like simple things like that we take for granted, and then you're expected to do once you're an adult out in the real world. real world applicable skills. And so I would even go so far as to say that you could, this is where you could overlap it with the academics, that in the biology you actually teach people how to be able to do things as like camping. You could probably put that in the last third, which would be a physical education. So, actively pursuing sports, athleticism, all that stuff. I would even go so far as to say that you make martial arts mandatory for that physical component. That to graduate high school, you have to master a martial art, and what you do is we make them all available to you, and then by the time you're in 6th grade is when you start, and it's part of your academic day. So the likelihood is you'll have people who not only graduate as experts in one martial art, but probably multiple ones. And then going back to practical skills, because again, this is where it kind of overlaps with a physical skill, that we teach people how to forage. You can eat dandelions, right? They call them weeds, but they're fucking flowers, and they're edible, right? Almost everything about them is edible. There's mushrooms. You have to be able to distinguish edible mushrooms from the ones that are poisonous. But you could teach, those are skills you can teach, right? So if that was your education leading up to post-secondary education, where now the emphasis is not on regurgitation, memorization, and I'm not talking about building like a functional memory, a capacity to retain information, a palace of wisdom. I mean like where you're just retaining the information long enough to be able to be tested on it, and then you forget it all.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing.
That's
all it is right now.
That's what mainstream education is. So you want to talk about a spiritual death? Fucking do that to people. Get people in this unnatural learning in this unnatural way for the purposes of testing, so they can get grades, so they can graduate, so that they can go out and then compete for jobs. Isn't that leading to spiritual death?
I think there's some people that would argue like it's not a good idea to have martial arts in the curriculum, but you think about it.
I just finished saying it was my opinion. They can go, hey, for those of you who think that martial arts are a bad idea in school, fuck you.
Yeah, right? Fuck you. Hear me out. But listen, how many kids go to school, they have gym classes, and then, sure, they do that for a little bit, they get out of school, and then they gain massive amount of weight, they're unhealthy, they're unhappy. I think it's more violent to allow young people to stay fat rather than to put them in this
I think
kind of military.
I think if you present the martial arts right, I want to be right, that completely in its entirety, it's not fighting.
Right.
It's about it is art, but it's also about the evolution of the individual, the transformation of the individual, where now they end up becoming really intimately understanding their own physical limitations and their mental limitations, and then it teaches them to push past those things. I think you would see a curb in violence. Because people would end up cultivating, as a result of all that training, cultivating a respect for violence that you don't see, that people use it as a tool to facilitate whatever the hell it is that they want. So I think there's, for any detractor who would say that it might be a negative, it can't be any worse than what people are currently doing now. And look what it's wrought.
What's killing people in North America? Obesity. Like heart attacks.
Well, so then if you make
fucking mental issues.
All right, so then part of that physical education is learning everything about what it means to physically be a human. How do you feed that? And again, see it overlaps with the other portion of practical skills, like preparing food. How do you feed a human body? It's a question that should be answered, that everybody should, if you were to ask it, everybody should know.
Right.
But nobody does. Do you know what they want? I like Cheetos.
Yeah.
Chicky nuggets.
Chicky nuggets.
Chicky nuggets. No, I don't eat anything except chicky nuggets and French fries.
Yeah.
I go.
A lot of my friends don't know how to cook. My friend and I would say the past year or two, I've been practicing. Fuck, it's not as hard as it seems. It just takes time.
It's a life skill that everybody should know, and you should come out of high school with the capacity to do it. And now I'm not talking about boiling dry noodles and then adding a flavoring packet to the water and go, hey, dinner's ready, bon appetit.
Bon apple feet.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, and it's a reflection of where we are. So if Universe 25 is illustrated anything, that maybe that's what we are. We're in the throes of the spiritual death, and I think we very wrongfully assume that it's like it happens very quickly. What if it doesn't? What if it's dragged out? So then, but we're higher order thinkers. We can prevent that outcome. How? By fostering meaning and purpose. So then the meaning becomes this. Take this from the martial arts: self-evolution, self-transformation. And you provide them the education that gives them the capacity and the ability to do that. So then you'd have a society where the population are independent thinkers. They understand. They actually know the difference between thinking out of self-interest and then thinking in a broader kind of way. That they're fluent in that stuff. That's not stuff that's foreign to them. Because if you bring it up to them now, they look at you sideways like you got a third eye. What are you talking about? I think all the time.
Yeah. No, they other you right away.
Right.
And what happens when that happens? Like, it leads to more violence. It's the idea that
or your confrontation, sure.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm of the mind then that if this is where we are, since we contributed to the problem, that we're also the solution, and then it requires you to try. Here's for purpose and meaning, achieve balance. Seek understanding. As a result of doing that, it will lead, there's no way of avoiding it, it will lead to personal evolution and transformation. So it becomes the evolution of consciousness, which is what we desperately need, because unfortunately our society, out of its self-interest and selfishness, has put all of our thinking and our attitudes about life in a box.
Right.
Time to get rid of the box.
I think about like what Nietzsche said about what happens in postmodern world where you lose this idea of God. We have to replace it. It's not that they're
right. Because we've got to ask the question: what did it provide? Why was it so important?
Right.
Well, it provided meaning and purpose. Well, okay, then if meaning and purpose is what we really require, then you can derive it from virtually anything. Right? It's clearly demonstrated. That much in the statement you just made, so that it can come from any source. So then you have to think about, well, what kind of quality of meaning and purpose do you want?
Look at what the mice did. Did they have a good one?
No.
Violent.
Right, and we demonstrate that too within the context of like contemporary society, right? That aberrant behavior, cannibalism, where we're essentially just turning on each other and demonstrating extreme behaviors. We already do that. We're there.
It's a dog eat dog world.
Right. So given a choice, if you're open-minded and free and to think freely, where you sit there and question the exact way that you're thinking and why you think the way that you think, that when you deconstruct the processes of thinking and then you start looking at things objectively, there's only one conclusion: to seek balance, seek understanding, and then as a result of all of that, it leads to personal evolution and transformation. What could be more satisfying than that? You're talking about elevating yourself, and then so you're the problem and the solution. You're everything that we need. You're the fucking answer, not the institutions, not politicians, not spiritual leaders, not nobody. You don't need anyone to show you the way. You just need good access to information, education. So another way of saying, good education. Well, you can provide that. You don't need those institutions, right? Remember, the institutions become more important than the idea that started them. So now you take back that power. Everything that the idea that created the institutions, you become the living embodiment of the idea. So you seek knowledge, you seek to expand yourself, you exist to explore reality and to be an integral part of this reality. And then your interactions with each other amongst your peers becomes a reflection of that. So then it becomes healthy, balanced, right? Like it goes, this is what we're really talking about. But everybody gets so caught up in their own shit and they think their shit doesn't stink. Well, here, the reality is it does.
I want to hear that again. When you have, not that I didn't understand it,
Right.
when you have an idea, you create a system that can share it, an institution.
Right.
But the idea changes as ideas do.
It's not that the idea changes.
It grows.
It becomes an institution, and then the institution treats itself with more importance than the idea that inspired the institution. So then it becomes the ultimate subjective view. So now the institution only is a shadowy reflection of the idea that inspired it. That it's more interested in its own gains. So think about it, like universities and stuff like that are institutions of higher learning, where what they're concerned with is telling the students how to conduct themselves, tuition, the administration of an institution of higher learning, where the purpose was the reason for places of higher learning was to broaden the individual. And now what are we seeing on campuses? The narrowing of the individual.
Yeah, I've heard the whole idea that campuses are kind of bought out by leftist ideals. It doesn't really matter what ideals
Well,
it is.
it's just a one-sided. So if it's a one-sided view, so like you said, the leftist view, then it's lopsided. There's no balance in it.
Yeah, and diversity is an amazing thing.
100%.
When you bring diversity to an idea and you explore it in every other way you can, you don't get just that one dogmatic view. You get a holistic view, and it's beautiful.
Right. So we're talking about being whole as individuals, so that wholeness can exist in everything, and everything that we do, and every interaction that we have. So that includes the institutions of education. It's an interaction. It's a place where individuals meet and can potentially exchange ideas. When I was in my 20s, a long time ago, campuses is where counterculture ideas were grown and nurtured and then spread out to the rest of the world. And now they're the places where they demonstrate, you'll forgive me for saying, but closed-mindedness, our way or the highway kind of attitude, which
super authority.
Yeah, and the worship of authority and safety and security. Well, guess what? Life is a risk.
Yeah.
So stop being fucking afraid. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to be afraid. Don't let it make decisions for you. Right? Don't allow for your emotions to feed into your subjective view, where the only thing you see is your own self-interest, because the only worth that you can imagine is your self-worth. Right? It only works if that view of self-worth, that you extend it to everybody else. Then you have worth, and then you have value. But if it's only your self-worth, it's nothing. Right? It's the spiritual death. Right? Because you only care about what you want. I want my needs. Meet my needs. I'm sorry, probably shouldn't do that. but it's the kind of thing that this is what we're confronted with. And so then the question becomes, what do we do? What can you do? You don't need the institution. Self-educate. Learn everything you could possibly think to learn. Cultivate physical skills. Cultivate skills, period. Take the time. The reward will be in doing it. Like Kurt Vonnegut said, go into the arts. Not because you're going to make a living, but it's an opportunity to express yourself, the ability to unload some of that emotional baggage that you carry around. And then don't be afraid of your feelings, right? They're just temporary. They'll pass. Don't feed into the fear. Fear is a liar, right? It wants you to hang your head in conformity. It wants you to do as you're told. Don't do as you're told. Disobey. Be disobedient, but intelligently, thoughtfully, right? And I'll reiterate it again. We're at a time now where the most important thing that we can do as individuals is experience a personal revolution, evolution of your consciousness, of the way you think. Start looking at reality in the world differently. You don't have to be trapped, right? The trap's a mental construct. You can get you can override it.
I've had friends that mentioned like they think, there has to be a bloody revolution. It's like, no, that's absolutely not it. You don't want a bloody revolution where people, like, who replaces the people that got taken out? The violent people that took them out. That's not a good thing. We don't want reactive people in this same spot. What we want is like a slow burn, like you say.
Right. So physical revolution, I think the time of that historically is past. Right, so it may have been beneficial. There might have been a time where it was actually perhaps even the only thing we could do, but we're way past the need for that. Violent revolution is not the answer. Violence is not the answer.
It's a very toddler-like reaction. Just
Right.
Like, wham, wham, I'm gonna throw my fist.
Right. So if there's going to be a revolution, the revolution has to be in the elevation of the individual, so that you don't experience a spiritual death, that you have meaning and purpose in your life, that you create it as much as you discover it, and it's direct result of all the explorations that you take, which are intended for you to understand better in terms of yourself, your role in the world, and everything. That's a revolution in thinking. It's a radical way of viewing yourself. Think about that other food for thought video. What was it called? Become a renegade, individualist, critical, objective thinker. So I don't like to use terms to like sort of, because they become a box, right? It becomes the institution. But it's an accurate reflection of what's required. You have to become a renegade, humanist, critical, objective thinker. That's what's required, and that's the revolution, evolution of consciousness. We're not talking about sorting other people out physically and stuff like that. I know it's an antiquated concept. And I'm the first one to tell you that personal combat will never go out of style. You're always going to have a moment sometimes within human interactions where there's going to be a breakdown of your ability to communicate, and then it lends to a physical confrontation, and so that then you're forced to confront the opposition in a physical way. But that should be the rarity. It should be a minority. It should almost never happen, right? But the fact is that it's not going away. It's a part of the way that we interact. So you can have a thoughtful, intelligent confrontation with another human being that can even be a little bit aggressive, but that doesn't have to be reduced to violence. Where you can like have a disagreement, or you can have a conflict of views, and then if what you favor is understanding, then what you'll do is try to come to some kind of understanding. And so even though it seems paradoxical or kind of contrary, the martial arts are good for that. It teaches you to favor more transcendental kind of thinking, and so that you're not trapped by the convention of like solving problems with your fists, that there might be a better way to resolve the issue, and then come out of it not feeling like you were exploited, or without you exploiting the other party involved, right? So there's real value in that education. So martial arts, I think, should be a huge part of that education, especially to the detractors. Most of them who would say nay are people who've never done it. So how would you even know?
I wouldn't be surprised if people who don't explore this actually have this more violent outlook because they're not sure what they can handle. Like,
right.
They don't know themselves.
Right, and that's probably right. So that's probably the greatest value of studying martial arts, the philosophical side of it, where you really end up cultivating this intimate relationship with yourself, so then you understand your own limitations, and then you're constantly working to push beyond those limitations. Well, what could be more purposeful and meaningful and satisfying than pushing past your own limits?
It's not one of those fast food hamburgers, man.
Right, 100%. Those things. Every time I eat one of those, and I don't eat them very often, but every time I do, 5 minutes later, I always feel like that was the most unsatisfying thing I ever ate.
Yeah, but people trick themselves into liking it.
I don't get it.
The way I see it, this was the best advice I've ever gotten. If you have issues with another person, the way you treat them is like you have to see them the next day. Now imagine if you realized, oh, the food I'm eating, if I do this every day, what's going to happen to me? If I treat my neighbor or my coworker this way every single day, even if it's a small annoyance, you ruin the relationship. If you're going to see somebody every day, or even if you're not going to, but you act as if you do, you respect them. You treat them like a human being and not just the other.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with everything you just said. I think that it speaks to the value of understanding and and then getting out of your subjective view, and then objectivity allows for you to try and understand the other, right? And that in that understanding, then you're able to come to kind of discover solutions that are mutually beneficial, right? So I think there's real value in that, and I think that the shame is that we don't treat it with the kind of value that it deserves. It's understated, and most people, they'll look down on you, or worse, that somehow it's a reflection of some kind of weakness in you, right? And I'm like going, really? Is that's the thing that you get from that?
Yeah. It's like the idea of somebody going, oh, what, you're a baby, you're not a man, you're crying.
Oh,
it's like,
God.
do you know how hard it is to be in tune with your emotions? That's very difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
And to not react violently, or not to react as if the
To not be reactionary, but
important.
to be able to have the time or have the capacity, and maybe even the skill to not be unduly motivated by your emotions, which would feed into a subjective self-interest, right? It's ego. It's what it wants you to value you first, right? What you do is you learn and you train yourself to not do that.
And it's a balance too. If you're too empathetic as a person, you give too much of yourself, that's again negative.
Right.
You're
It's
not treating yourself.
right, because you're out of balance. You're lopsided now, right? So it really is the balancing of those two. It's the unity of opposites. We talked about this when we discussed yin and yang, right? Like that you can't illustrate this enough, how the importance and value of seeking balance, and always trying, and that it's not this static thing. Oh, I'm balanced. Oh, you're constantly struggling to keep balance. That's what's real.
Yeah.
And then, so you devote your energies to that end, and then eventually it does, to a degree, become easier to do.
I was gonna say, it's funny if somebody says like, "Oh, I'm finally actualized." It's like, come on.
It's a never-ending process. It's funny how you said that where they'll refer to themselves in those terms, right? Oh, I'm spiritual, and I'm like, okay, that's all fine and well, but like, what are you doing to facilitate that? And how are you evolving personally? If the answer is you're not, then you're just repeating, like, it's rhetoric. You're just repeating this mantra in the hopes that somehow that it might be true. If you say it enough times, eventually it might be true.
Yeah.
Instead of treating it for what it really is, which is work.
Yeah, I want to be very loving, peaceful, hippie-like, but you can't be a pacifist. I'm going to be honest, it's kind of bullshit.
Well, I've often said that about pacifism, that it creates victimization, or sets up the potential for it. That you don't have to be violent, but you should never be pacified. You know, that you need to stand your ground, and that requires courage and not having fear of physical consequences, like of standing your ground, because sometimes that That becomes part of the human experience. Come on. This is not risk-free, right? It's part of the risk of being alive. That means sometimes you take a beating and sometimes you give one. That's, and that, again, not all the time. It's just in part, sometimes part of the experience, right? So, and to be able to, and to treat it like it's just this neat, convenient thing that you can wrap in a bow tie. Life is not like that. Life is this thing that's tragic and sometimes even cruel in its tragicness. But it's not just that. It's rewarding, it's enriching, it's mind-blowing, it's damning, it's everything. It's not one thing. And to lean towards one thing takes you out of balance.
Especially when it's always evolving.
Right, so if life is in a constant state of evolution, then why? And as the observer, then you are the observation. Then doesn't stand to reason then that you should be in a constant state of evolution. So where you are today is not where you're going to be tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next 10 years, next decade, whatever, 100 years, if you can live that long. The point is that maybe we've got lost in our distractions. We've got lost as a result of the spiritual death, meaningless, purposeless existences, where now the only thing you're doing is you're compounding the emptiness of your existence by now adding distraction. So as much as you can drink, smoke, many drugs as you can do, and it's not a judgment, right? But if that's what you're doing, then that's your meaning and purpose. It's just to distract yourself so you don't have to face the reality of who and what you are. You should face it. You shouldn't be afraid of it. You shouldn't come at this emotionally and have an emotional response to it. You're going to, but don't allow for the emotions to dictate what you do. You can do it as purely as an act of intelligence, as an act of understanding, as an act of exploration. And guess what? That means sometimes falling and having horrible failures. It's all part of the experience.
If somebody falls and has a bad experience, I'm going to be honest, I think if they go through a couple of your videos, it'll get them right back on the horse.
Well, I think
Hopefully.
I think that's inherent in all of us. Like, that's the second death, right? The physical death. If you got too beat up by life and you're already spiritually dead now, and now life's physically kicked the shit out of you, and you're just gonna lay there and what? Dissolve into the earth. So long as there's breath in your lungs, so long as you can move, then you should keep moving. Get up. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to fear. It's all gonna come to an end anyway. So the real question becomes, what are you gonna do between now and then? Nothing or everything? Come on, it's not even really a choice, right? But that's life. What are you gonna do, right? People are people, and I know the real danger is coming off preachy, and I'm not trying to, and I hope I didn't, but that's the risk. You can't have this kind of a conversation and that not potentially come off sounding like that, right? So I'm not trying to. All I'm trying to do is express these ideas. So there's real world examples. We're not talking about airy-fairy things that aren't real.
Right.
We're talking about things that you can't exactly put your finger on, but that you can work towards and that you can achieve as a result of education, self-education, learning, seeking understanding, live for balance, create meaning and purpose in your existence, and then go and make those things real. And then never stop, right?
Jerry Smith once said, "I'll stop trying when I die."
That's probably true for all of us. Can I get a time check? How long have we been at this?
We've been at this a while. We have 1 minute left, and we're in.
I think this might actually be a really good time to kind of sum this up. This to me was a lot of fun today.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this one. So I want to thank all of you who are going to participate and watch this. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate you coming out and just watching the videos. Slim, you got anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you for watching. I really hope you guys have a fun and stressful day.
Or stress less.
Well, less stress, but there gotta be a little bit.
Sure.
And you kick that stress's ass. You do it. I believe in you.
And on that note, I just like to say, question everything. And thank you for your time.